All right, cool. Our impact outweighs failure to cohere around class struggle, makes collective suicide inevitable through inequality and the collapse of global finance. Sense of McLaren Evans. Our impacts are systematic and ongoing. 250 million children are wage slaves. Half the world lives on less than 2,000 a day. Environmental exploitation, widespread inter- and interstate conflict and oppression among multiple different axes are all rooted in material relations of production. Even if we don't turn the F, you should vote negative because the impact our method itself is categorically larger. The link to be black labor is not the point of connection between race and capital, but an expression of its dominant logics. The choice not to be productive and to be carefree and sit requires a minimal level of capital privilege. For example, the way Lord's semi-stable labor allows her to largely escape the Reagan-era welfare surveillance, but presenting the AF method as a strategy that is always accessible to black women ignores the banal labor necessary to reach that point, and that is structurally closed to certain individuals who are forced to work, for example, 2 or 3 jobs at a high cost and do not have the luxury of any carefree time at all. Second link is expression. Personal expression is not a strategy in a vacuum, but a strategy made possible by continuous banal exploitation of black people's labor. The reason that we are able to access something like health as justice and not as a commodity came due to the struggles of something like the Black Panther Party and the ability to develop health clinics that change the national discourse on healthcare, all of which is written over by the affirmative, which starts with a presumption that that form of health is already available. The second example is the idea that the affirmative is able to contest dominant beauty standards just from expression and ignores the way that those standards were developed over time, the way that people, and specifically women in the advertising industry, had to labor for an extremely long period of time to make it even acceptable to utter those different kinds of standards in the first place. The third link is austerity logic. Valorizing particular types of experience can lead to an overvaluation of certain experiences that ends up limiting what is seen as a successful resistance strategy, and accordingly leads movements to surveil their members, making them abstain from behaviors that do not fit that proper model, which turns their arguments about subject creation and means that the affirmative is much worse for organizing. The fourth link is recognizing work. Capitalism's refusal to recognize black women's contributions as work and as productive is what produces disproportionate demands to participate in unequal wage labor. The AF, by saying that productivity is bad, devalues those day-to-day contributions and replaces racial capital's logic and replicates racial capital's logic for not recognizing them in the first place. This is a link to their particular pedagogy. Our Ebert evidence says that the pedagogical move to center discussions on experience, or the starting point of the self as defining corporeality, uniquely ignores the demands that politics creates on the body and the insidious logic that it entails. It creates a model of discussion that circulates experience without a framing mechanism for how that experience is historically produced. Their next argument is that the AF is the speaking commodity, but the speaking commodity is conditioned by what is considered efficacious. This is our austerity argument. Mitchell criticizes Lord's argument that self-care and expression can be political warfare. The problem is that when experience is used for political value, there is a danger that one's behavior becomes regulated on the basis of how much quote-unquote intrinsic value it creates, which was the 2AC argument about why the AF is a link turn. They said the AF self-hypervaluation. It does not. The link argument is that the affirmative endorses particular modes of expression that create a structure of prioritizing certain modes over others. For example, under the affirmative's framework, we would presumably say people that decide to care about capitalist institutions and work within them should be deprioritized because that reproduces violence, even though that can be a certainly subjective distinction. Their argument that the affirmative is collective action contradicts a number of points of the 1AC because it one posits that the AF was inherently politically productive, which means that they buy into the same political requirements we criticize, and that requirement undergirds most of the claims about the 1AC strategy. Second, a focus on two people is not collective action. The distinction matters because their starting point of selves inherently militates against larger organizing strategies. There are two warrants for that. The first is that self-preservation and empowerment is the endpoint of their strategy. As long as they have effectively been carefree, they have met the goal of the 1AC. The second is that survival strategies inherently presume that the world is structurally unchangeable and prioritize a focus on how we live in the now, which forgoes a critical interrogation of the material conditions that got us here. The next argument is that structural analysis is always incomplete. Materialism obviously does not say that you can only recognize structures, but the important thing is the conditioning factor for society is the way materiality creates the basis for individual experience. The distinction between the neg and AF pedagogy is theirs does not recognize the malleability and changing nature of structures and the way they determine the way experience is expressed, which means that we largely subsume that form of analysis. Structure sometimes works through people, but there are also material conditions that exist on the outside of them, something like the surveillance of the welfare system imposes itself onto people rather than working through them, and that was created by a complex ideological and regulatory process. We don't separate the personal and professional. We are obviously all embedded in capital, which is all the more reason why it should be the focus of pedagogy. However, the idea that people who are complicit in a structure are irreproachable is a terrible way to approach politics, because it would say that all of the people who are forced to engage in the capitalist systems for mere subsistence should just be rejected in any discussion. The permutation, the K, should be a question of better pedagogy. They don't get a perm. The alt establishes a criteria, so only one team can do it best. Any marginal net benefit is sufficient to outweigh the F. Pedagogical incoherence. We presented an exclusive model of education which their starting point undermines. Being carefree towards the structure of capital links to all of their arguments, because we should care about the structural capital and recognize that some people are not able to engage in that method. The alternative, pedagogical pedagogy, is able to develop complete strategies of resistance to capitalism, which is largely conceded. A mix of critical examination of class conflicts and political demands through collective organizing is key to envisioning a socialist horizon. Their final argument was about universals, and the alt says that we should have a pedagogy that centers materialism, but not say that any one person needs to embrace universal connections.
This is going to be a quick video. The titles of the series gives away what the 2 and R choice is. So how do we go about evaluating the 1 and R? There are some strategic things that can be done in a 1 and R like this, so let's talk about them. First, the 1 and R could be extended to a second option, and the choice won't be made until the 1 ER is over what to go for. I'm not going to dissect if the 1R extends the cap K in a way that makes it a viable 2R choice. It's not really the purpose of this video. Second, the 2R is going to be framework, but the 1R is going for something else. What things can the 1R do to optimize their impact on the debate in a case like this? Ultimately, over the course of several rounds or tournaments, the 2R has to be willing to go for other stuff to keep the AF honest. The more that happens, the better time trade-offs the neg will achieve. But what else can the 1R do? A good idea is to extend arguments to serve multiple purposes, or it can help multiple pieces of paper. So for example, if the 1R is self-care bad, that could be a 2R, but it could also be used to undermine some of the AF's T answers, since some still rely on self-care being good. Looking at the 1R from that perspective, there is room for improvement. The speech is overly focused on indicting the mechanism of the affirmative and proving a trade-off argument between the affirmative and the alternative, but this is to the detriment of forwarding a counter-explanation of Rutgers' descriptive claims. Leaving it at what Rutgers is saying is right, but capitalism is the cause, doesn't quite go far enough. It would be better to say Rutgers is wrong and the reason is capitalism than explain that. Another outlet for this kind of arguing is the alternative. If the alternative is couched in terms that are anti-capitalist but also topical, then that explanation can be used in the 2 and R when discussing how the neg interp resolves parts of the F. So as we approach the 1 and R, it's a good practice to think about how each team can win the debate. Thus far, Georgetown hasn't responded as specifically as they could to Rutgers' claims, and some of the T defenses are general as well. So there's an opening for Rutgers to distinguish away a lot of the arguments that Georgetown is making. But Georgetown does have a catch-all argument about the role of the neg and the purpose of debate, which can allow Rutgers to be right about a lot of the stuff that they're saying, but still let the judges conclude Georgetown should win. This was fully articulated for the first time in the 2 and C, so we shall see how Rutgers responds in the 1AR.